Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Omar El Fares, and I'm delighted today to have a very special guest with me to discuss Palestine and the American politics surrounding it. And who better to do that than with my friend Khalil Sayegh? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Omar. Looking forward to conversation, man.
Definitely. My friend Khalil is the executive director and the founder of Agora Initiative, and he is a political analyst focused on the Palestinian Israeli conflict. Khalil has lived most of his life in Gaza and the West Bank, where he was involved in political activism and humanitarian initiatives. And Khalil has previously worked on international organizations focusing on promoting freedom of religion and rule of law in the Middle East. Um, and also, he has appeared on TV where he has offered analysis, including in BBC, ABC, Australia, and Al Jazeera. And he has written also work on Al Monitor, The New Arab, and The Economist. Um, so it's a great pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to have this discussion with you. I remember our first interaction we had was it was actually before this entire war began. It was through the Israeli-Palestinian what they call like reconciliation platform called Sulha, where we discussed, from my memory, different pathways and methods to reach Palestinian freedom and statehood, and how to win the narrative among our people, and how to get support for it. So, is there something I missed here just in the introduction?
No, I think you did a good job, Omar.
So, what I haven't said yet is that you're a Palestinian Christian, and
Mhm.
you have, and I think what makes it interesting is because there is always a narrative among people um who discuss Palestine, that they try to they try to speak on your behalf.
Yeah,
Um so, as a Palestinian Christian, you've lived under Hamas in Gaza, and then you have moved to the West Bank, where you've also lived on a Palestinian Authority, and of course, also been exposed to the Israeli occupation most of your life. Could you give us an insight of how your life has been in Palestine under the various different rules?
absolutely. Like all Palestinians, Omar, Palestinian Christians are born to a reality of the brutal occupation that exists in Palestine. One is not spared from the Israeli terrorism or violence because he's Christian. Matter of fact, they're just facing the same oppression as the Muslim Palestinians and others. And therefore, I was born to a family that have experienced Nakba in 1948. They were ethnic cleansed from historical Palestine. And since my childhood, I remember the Second Intifada very vividly in my memory. And I remember the Israeli Air Force bombing Gaza. I remember the checkpoints in Gaza, the settlements back then in Gaza that have made the Palestinian lives in Gaza really horrific. And I also had experienced many violent incidents by settlers and also by the Israeli military when I lived in the West Bank, because since 2010 to 2021, I lived in the West Bank after I moved from Gaza before I moved to the US. So that is the primary issue here that Palestinian Christians are dealing with, like what the rest of Palestinians. We are dealing with a brutal Israeli occupation that have suppressed our freedom and that is pushing all Palestinians outside of the land. And that's not a conspiracy theory of any sort. That is a stated goal of the Israeli government to always ensure that the Palestinian demography remain in control in the service of increasing Jewish demography. So that's like an obvious fact. Nonetheless, Palestinian generally and Palestinian Christians specifically had their own challenges with Hamas regime as well. When Hamas took charge in 2007, following the election that they won, they had a coup, military coup against the Palestinian Authority there, and repressed any form of opposition to Hamas, that is any other political party, any other free of assembly, etc. An actual authoritarian government was formed. Christians had their own personal challenges with Hamas as well, because not that Hamas necessarily was targeting Christians or not, but Hamas is an Islamic movement, or as I like to use more, the academic phrase of Islamism. And the way you define Islamism, usually it's a movement that try to, or a party that try to rule and change the society toward a particular interpretation of political Islam. It's different than Islamic generally, because majority of Muslims in Palestine, at least, don't support this form of government, right? But Hamas does, and therefore the Islamization of the society has meant it challenging for the Palestinians. What Islamization of society do I mean? I'll give you two examples. For example, after Hamas took over, Christians remained free to worship in their homes and their churches, but they no longer have the display of worship in public. Notice in the West Bank this week, for example, you see marches of Palestinian Christians in the West Bank celebrating in public. A matter of fact, even Muslims joined with them. We've seen a video from the governor of Ramallah, who's a Muslim woman, Dr. Layla Ghannam, and she's literally a hijabi and she's celebrating with the Christians. In Gaza, it was not allowed, and it's still not allowed for Palestinian Christians to celebrate in public and for Muslims to join them as well. So that has been a challenge. That Islamization of the society makes Christians feel foreign in their own land and want to leave. And then when you Islamize the public square, in a liberal fashion, what it tells any minority, not only Christian, if there are any minority there, that they're not welcome there. So no, Hamas has been also terrible for the Palestinian Christian, and also for freedom of conscience and freedom of expression generally. Now, the Palestinian Authority is also problematic, not for Palestinian Christians, for freedom of speech generally. They're not democratic per se, but they had, according to all numbers, by the way, even V democracy and other measures, it's a little bit more democratic than Hamas. That's shocking to people to hear, but it's just a, a statistical fact on every measure. When it comes to freedom of religion for Christians, it has been completely free. You are allowed to practice your faith both in public and private in the West Bank. We never had the issue. The issue we're facing in the West Bank, like in Gaza, is the lack of freedom of religion due to the Israeli occupation. Our ancestors lived in that land for centuries, Omar, and for centuries we were never prevented from going to the Church of Holy Sepulchre on the feast of Pesach, the feast of the Resurrection, Easter, which is today, by the way, in the Orthodox calendar. And for many years, the Israeli forces have prevented Christians from Gaza and the West Bank to go and participate in this feast. But it also prevented Christians from Lebanon and from Syria and from the other areas. There is no mechanism for these Christians, or even Jordan, to come there. And even with Egypt, they allow some Christians to come under very humiliating conditions. And after you are above 50, although Egypt has a peace treaty with them, again, these are people who lived there for centuries in the Middle East. And these are the indigenous people of the Middle East, and they've used to go worship in Jerusalem every month every year for like centuries, and you are preventing them right now, but you are allowing American Christians, for example, to come freely, and others. This is an issue that Christians are dealing with.
Mm, certainly. So I think, I mean, as much like there is a rightful criticism against Hamas, the rule. I mean, it's not only, of course, for Christians. I think there is a huge segment in Gaza and also West Bank who have been very critical to the actions of Hamas and so. But I've seen something very extensively when I've been on social media, when I've been talking to people about the situation in Palestine, because they try to make the image that Israel is the protector of Christians,
Yeah.
and if Israel would end the occupation, we would have like an ISIS kind of state in the Gaza Strip, and also that would be transferred to the West Bank. And we have this kind of image that Israel is the only state where where the Christian community is thriving in the Middle East, where everywhere else it's declining.
So to start with, I mean, like what we have to acknowledge, Hamas is terrible, right? But Hamas is not ISIS, and Hamas is not even remotely close to even, the government of Syria that is a little bit more fundamental than it. So in a way, you could argue that Christians could flourish under a Hamas regime better than, for example, the Syrian regime because of the ideological, commitment of a movement like the Syrian government that, to my knowledge, they are offshoot of Al Qaeda. Not that I'm criticizing them or anything. I think they've done a lot of reform. They still have a lot more to do. There are massacres against Christians there, against Druze and others. There is things to do. We never seen massacres against Christians in Gaza or any killing. There's one case of one guy who was killed. Since Hamas took over, Rami Ayyad, but no other case than that. Is the situation perfect? No, by no means. Is it better than other Islamist regimes? Absolutely. Now, there is also a flawed logic here that if a Palestinian state is to be established, it will always be Hamas that will be in charge. That's actually not true. Statistically speaking, majority of the Palestinian peoples oppose Hamas. Even those who have voted for Hamas in the 2000 election, majority of them are not Hamas by ideology. And not only that, but also they support two states, like 73 from them. So they are moderate who voted for Hamas due to the lack of options. What Israel has been doing, though, Omar, and that's a policy that goes all the way to the 80s, not even to the 90s with Benjamin Netanyahu, to the 80s with the founding of Hamas, is that the Israeli logic goes as following. We have to empower Hamas and the Islamist extremists as much as possible to make the Palestinians look that they're incapable of governing and they're divided on the one hand, and on the other hand, to make them look as an Islamic extremist or Islamist extremist. The unfortunate reality, and that's what I always tell my Islamist friend, that Hamas unfortunately played to these tropes easily. Hamas could have distinguished itself from all these tropes, but in their actions and what they've done, they have proven over and over these tropes. Now, things have improved in the last 10 years of Hamas history. I have to give them credit. They're still terrible. Again, I don't want to be misquoted here. I don't like them, and they attack me all the time. I'm on the record. But they've improved. They've changed terminology that, in their first declaration, they literally called Jews the descendant of pigs and apes, like very anti-Semitic terminology that used from out of context from an old Islamic text. They've also referred to the Book of Elder of Zion, very well-known anti-Semitic tropes, etc. Yet, they change it, and that's positive. But they haven't changed that much on the ground, and they still, push Islamization, etc. Just this week, we've had cases of 13 years old women in Gaza who were forced, out of school because they're not wearing hijab. Where is that? Like, what are we talking about? The Palestinian society has never been this way. So that's the unfortunate reality. Hamas is, in a way, the creation, obviously, of the occupation due to the structural causes that created it. But not only that, Omar, it's also funded by Israel at the beginning. And I'm by no means I'm claiming that Hamas today is an asset of the Israeli government. Directly, they're not, but they were created by them, and they acknowledge that. And they have been playing to the narrative of the Israeli right for so long. So what's the solution here? I think the solution is for the Palestinians to realize that that's not the method. And majority of Palestinians do, but they lack organization, Omar. That's the issue. And Fatah has gotten so weak because of Israel in part and because of its own corruption. It's both, and because of Hamas, obviously. And organize around the core of what Palestinian nationalism is about. That is, it's about equality of all its citizens. It's about a secular Palestine, regardless of how do you define secular, because the way Palestinians define secular, not in really the same way Anglo-Saxon secularism is, or even French secularism is. It's a unique Middle Eastern secularism where religion actually has a place, but it has a limited place in the way it impacts laws and orders and on the ground. So that is something I think we have to work on. That being said, regardless of what we choose, I have said it on the record, even if it means that I will live under a future Hamas government, I would rather do that than live under Israeli occupation, because that's a foreign occupation. Now, would I be okay living under Hamas government right after the occupation? No, I would be fighting against it, but I'll be fighting with my brothers, people who are from my nation, Palestinians who think differently than me, and I would do my best to make sure that I get rid of a Hamas regime and replace it with a Palestinian government that represents the whole Palestinian people. But I would never accept a foreign occupation imposed on me that treat me as not a human.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably also share what I would say here, but lots of Palestinians I talk to, including in Palestine, even those who favor Hamas, they don't do that necessarily because they agree with Hamas's
Yeah,
ideology,
yeah,
but because they see the Palestinian Authority as useless.
yeah,
So, um, and whenever like you will make a criticism of Hamas's actions, you see what Israel is going to do after October 7. Like I said it already on the first day. What would happen? People would say, "Yeah, you're justifying this and that," and then they would say there will be no alternative. And I mean, the way the Palestinian Authority is currently operating, it doesn't have much leverage against Israel. So, whenever there are settler terrorist attacks, when there are new settlements that are being established in the West Bank, and you see all the negative trends under the Palestinian Authority, even from my understanding, people who have been living in the Gaza Strip under Hamas, as terrible it was before October 7, like people didn't go through checkpoints every
yeah,
day. So, and I've been in the West Bank like 3 years ago, and I remember how indignifying it was for me to need to pass through such checkpoints. Even though I have a Swedish passport, they will treat me as someone who is Palestinian but who has a paper which
yeah.
they, barely recognize. So, I was always treated differently, even when I went like on such travel groups with other Europeans
Yeah.
who did have the similar IDs. So like just this thing is an indication of this really, racism. In how they treat people. This isn't only about what kind of ID you hold, but also what kind of race you have, what kind of name, how you look. Um, what we're seeing currently, there have been a massive increase of settler terrorist attacks, even against Christians in the West Bank, which is, in American discourse, whatever happens to Muslims, that will always be dehumanized, downplayed, and everything like that. But when we're seeing similar things happening, I think in Taipei and some other Christian villages in the West Bank, settlers have been attacking Christians, vandalizing, threatening, everything like that. And still, we can see American ambassador trying to whitewash whatever the settlers are doing. And we see also many American commentators who will say, Israel is still the most is the safest is the
Yeah.
safest place for
Right.
Christians, and this is maybe just like someone trying to stir up anti-Jewish sentiments, like whatever.
So the attacks on Christians is like the attacks on Muslims. It's not a new phenomenon, Omar. But what has happened since the war on Gaza has been a huge escalation and increase in the amount of settler terrorism against Palestinians as a whole in the West Bank. And specifically, there seemed to be a very clear intentional targeting Christians. And it doesn't take a lot to see that. They have built a new outpost of settlements right out of Taiba, the only exclusive Christian village that remains in near Ramallah in the West Bank. And they're attacked it over 100 times just in the last few months. And that so there is a repeated attacks. And the graffiti they write, insulting Christians and threatening them, is very specific and organized against Christians. Another outpost that is created in the area of Ghush in the east part of Bethlehem and Beit Sahur is technically going to divide the small town of Beit Sahur, another Christian town, to two parts, and it gonna make their life miserable. And what it will produce is will push Christians out of the West Bank. So that cannot be just random. It's well organized, and the Israeli Minister of Finance, Smotrich, came and visit this output. So it's funded by the government, it's organized by them, and it's meant to push Christians out. Now, When we at the Agora Initiative start talking about this issue specifically about Christians and start saying it's danger, we start posting on media, obviously, but we start making phone calls in DC and saying to our Christian brothers and sisters here, this is dangerous. This is about Palestinian freedom for sure. I'm Palestinian. I'm not hiding that. I'm proud of being Palestinian, but I'm also Christian, and I'm very proud of being Christian. And my ancestors has lived in that land for centuries to save the faith. We did it under the Islamic rule. We did it under the Crusade rule. We did it under the British rule, and we're doing it under that Israeli rule. Now, the only time we reached a point where we could disappear as Christian from that land is under the Israeli law and under these policies that they are pushing. We start talking about it. And then comes Tablet magazine, this perhaps one of the most prominent Jewish magazines in the US, and write a whole piece on Agora Initiative and myself and my colleague Ihab, calling us a propaganda operative for Palestine, targeting Christians. Seriously? Is stating that Christians are in danger, what they are in fact, and stating that settler terrorism is targeting them is a propaganda operation, and calling it fake, by the way. There are no doubt whatsoever to any reasonable person that Christians have been under attack and Christian villages have been under attack. So that's an issue that Christians are dealing with. Now, there is a danger when we try to frame this as an only Christian thing, because we forsake and leave our Muslim brothers and sisters. We do not, by no means. We believe that a Palestinian Christian is as equal of dignity and rights as a Palestinian Muslim and vice versa. But why do we focus on Christians in some of our messages? It's to resonate with the average American, especially on the conservative side, who for so long has been fed the idea that this is somehow a civilizational war between the Jews and the Christians, the whole thing called Judeo-Christian value, and then the barbaric quote unquote Muslims. And that cannot be farther from truth. Matter of fact, and you know that, Amar, the original intellectuals and founders of Palestinian nationalism were overwhelmingly Christians. Like you'd be surprised. You're like reading the literature and you're like, wow, Christians, despite being like less than 20% of our population at that time, were overrepresented in all the literature. And you ask the question, why? Why are Christians are so nationalist compared to even Muslims early on? And the reason, obviously, because missionary schools and others have educated them languages such as French, Germans, etc., and they were reading the literature outside, and they were reading Zionist literature early on, and they understood them. Christians learned German, Christians learned French, Christians learned English, and they were abroad. And Muslims, some Muslims intellectuals, the Khalidis, the Nashashibis, etc., I'm not downplaying them, but like a lot, much more Christians have. And they've read early on about Zionism and were able to detect that this is a danger to the Palestinian people and their future, and wrote early on, Al Carmel, Palestine paper, etc., had majority Christians that they were operating there. So by no means the Palestinian issue at its very core, and Palestinian identity is a identity that is inclusive to Muslims and to Christians and to all inhabitants. And I would argue even it should be, and we have issues with that, but it should be also for Palestinians, for Jews who feel that they would want to identify as Palestinians as well.
But I think it's quite interesting what you're mentioning here also about. I mean, like there is an interest among many Zionists, many people on the pro-Israel camp to try to create a division between um, either you stand with the Christians or you stand with the barbaric Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, Islamists. Whatever they will just throw whatever to try to demonize one side and then make the other side appear as the side that's like always attacked for nothing. And I was also about to ask you this question. I mean, like, given that you live in the United States right now, and you're reaching out to journalists, you're reaching out to politicians, and so on, and many of them are conservative. And like, do you generally get this image that they are very ignorant, have these kind of racist undertones, or what kind of image or like general experience do you have when you reach out to such profiles?
So generally, Omar, I am of the opinion that I don't use the term racist or ignorant or any of these negative accusations lightly. I try to really be specific to what I called racist. There are a lot of genuine racist people out there, and I feel comfortable calling them racist. But one of the things that frustrated me for years on the pro-Palestine left generally is the way in which they use certain heavy words easily. This is racist. If you disagree with us on the 1 or 2% or whatever, you're racist. And I'm afraid to say that even a lot of people who have racist sentiments and have been expressing racist sentiments are not even racist. They're just really don't know what they're talking about, and they've been fed by their media, they've been fed by their culture, etc. for so long, these racist ideas. I'll give you an example. Like, for example, your average Christian in the US, I don't know what the numbers now, but historically, have not known that Palestinian Christians exist. I remember there were at times when I speak, and I've been speaking to churches since 2017 in the US. I used to come and speak because I was in ministry before I did my political work. I studied theology and I was like a Protestant minister for a while. So I'd go to Protestant churches and I'd be speaking, and they will know we never heard that Palestinian Christians exist. We never know that that part of the region has Christians. And I told them, well, by the way, Christ came from there. So if there is no Christians there, it makes no sense because the Christianity started there. It makes sense that Christianity would continue in that area, and they are always surprised. And it's not because, like, your logic should be simple, because when you read the Bible, you should know that Christians exist there, because the Bible literally says people converted, so they didn't disappear. But it's amount of media and the amount of, like, campaigns and about of, like, Zionist actual propaganda about us that has been filling the US, especially in the last 50 years. It's tremendous, especially since the 67 and this whole, like, messianic area of Israel. And they managed to erase us from history generally. Now, what has been happening in the last 3 years, I would think, in the US is that there have been an awakening among Americans in general. We see it in the polls among the left and the right. But what has been really more fascinating this time, the awakening among conservatives and among Christians. That is not something that happened before historically, not since the establishment of the state of Israel, and the challenge to Christian Zionism and to their claims about Palestinians. And one has to ask the question, what is that? Why it's happening? And I talk to my friends all the time, because there are a lot of my friends who are in the left tell me, well, this is not genuine. It's not about Palestine. It's about anti-Semitism. It's about this. It's about that. I actually tend to disagree. I think it's a accumulation of different things. Uh, I think it's definitely a departure from the old theology of what's so known as dispensationalism. This whole idea that, the Jews have to come back to the land of Israel, the rapture has to happen, etc. You've heard that term probably many times. And there has been, in the last 30 years, gradual departure of dispensationalist theology, even among evangelicals, because it has proven that it's scholarly wrong to interpret the scripture in this way. And that's not a lot of people know that. But, like the most, non-scholars and seminaries in the US, so they don't teach dispensationalists anymore. Evangelical scholars and uh, um, um, seminaries, for example, Wheaton, known as the Harvard of the evangelicals in the US, it almost has no dispensationalist professor anymore. There are like two schools in the US that are not very prominent, but they're prominent enough that still teach dispensationalism, and that is Dallas Theological Seminary in Texas and Moody in Chicago. But that's all. So there has been change already that's happening in that regard. The second thing that happened, the rise of social media. The rise of social media broke the old monopoly of big corporation over the narrative that being taught to the public in America. And what it did, it allowed the conservative folks to look into what's happening in Palestine as it is, not through a filter. And what happened as a result of that, Palestinian Christians also found a voice in social media, and they broke through the narrative. And the third thing, the rise of the class of or the group of podcasters who are independent from corporate media. These are people with huge platforms. You take Candace Owen, take Tucker Carlson, whatever you think of them. Some of them are not jobs. I think Candace is beyond the pale myself. I think she spread a lot of crazy ideas. Tucker is, I think, much more serious person. But regardless of what you think of them, they had a huge influence. And they were able to produce and platform voices like my friend Faris Abraham, like my mentor Mandir Isaac, and others who haven't been platformed before, and that voice resonated with people. So all these things are happening. Now the question back to the initial, response, I get it from the left always. There's anti-Semitism, etc. Is there certain elements of anti-Semitism somewhere in the movement? Yes. Is it genuine because of hate of Jews? I don't think so exactly. There's some genuine hate there, I'm sure, but it's much more misunderstanding and much more reaction to the Zionist rejection of distinguishing Jews and Zionists. That's, I think, is the original sin of the modern anti-Semitism, because there is genuine anti-Semitism, historical, Christian. I read about it, I know it, understand it. It's despicable. As a Christian, I feel ashamed of our history of anti-Semitism against Jews. Modern anti-Semitism has, obviously, there is genuine anti-Semitic stuff. I think a lot of it comes from the lack of ability to distinguish Jews and Zionism, Jews and the state of Israel. I myself do not fall to that trap. The problem is that EDL, the definition of anti-Semitism that they use, the International Holocaust Memorial definition, etc., all of them insist upon the fact that Jews and Zionism is the same thing, and therefore paving the way for anti-Semites to use the same logic.
Yeah, I mean, definitely they try to link Israel and its actions with the Jewish people in one way or other. Like, you should not criticize Israel in one way, or and that particular way is its war crimes, its conduct of I mean, it's insane how people are trying to weaponize such definitions and so. And this gets us to the discussion about the language which is being used on Israel Palestine. As you mentioned, I mean, one can of course discuss exactly what many influencers are saying and so. But I mean, just like when one is listening to many conservatives, and I'm not a conservative, so I mean, often I hear they use the terminology Judea and Samaria. You hear this, you get the automatic connection that, okay, these people are not just talking about some ancient kingdoms like 2,000, 3,000 years ago, whatever. They're trying to, I mean, use religion in a way or other to say, look, this land has more connection with the Jewish people than the Palestinian people, and then they will make some a quote like, "Those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who will," something like that. You're much more familiar than me with the like biblical arguments. Um, but I mean, we're also seeing right now in America that there is an increased divergence between what the American politicians are saying and what ordinary Americans are perceiving on Israel Palestine. You see, the average American is much more now, or the Democrat at least. I think we're seeing also in the general population, including among Republicans, that people are being much more sympathetic towards Palestinians. And uh, and I get this image that the old language on Israel Palestine, using the language of, look, the Palestinians are terrorism, Israel is just defending itself. It's not working
It's
anymore.
not
It's
working.
losing. It's losing.
Yeah, and Generation Z just don't care less. I mean, I'm on like Instagram scrolling and I see the amount of criticism of Israel. There's jokes running about Netanyahu. There are like generations they call him Big Yahoo. There's all sort of things, and I'm like, wow, like this is not the U.S. of 2021 when I moved here. Like this is just different. There were at times where you have to be very measured of your criticism, etc. Not anymore. People are openly calling for defending Israel, etc. But when you go to the establishment, even the Democratic Convention just a few days ago rejected a bill to push for the boycott of Israel and defending their arms, etc. So even among Democrats, still there is a deep rejection of what their base is telling them. And that comes from two places. One, obviously, the donor class is disproportionately on the Zionist side for both parties generally. Not to say that all donors are Zionists, obviously no, but they have a disproportionate, donor class. And the second thing, there is still a fascination within the idea that criticizing Israel or pushing anything will frustrate the Jewish community and they'll accuse you of anti-Semitism. And that is partially true because there is a significant number among Jewish Americans who are still hold to that idea. But if you really look at the numbers, more and more Jewish Americans are also themselves are disassociating themselves from the state of Israel because obviously they see it's immoral, and Jewish Americans are Americans first. They look at America, there is democracy, rule of law, etc. And then they look at Israel as like an ethno state that they don't feel represented by it. And also the policies of Netanyahu, etc. You see, majority of Jewish Americans, for example, oppose the war in Iran. That's different, etc. So there's things happening, but the establishment it's still there, stuck in the old measures. But I don't think this would hold for so long. If the momentum we're living on, and that's a challenge for us, Palestinian Omar, is kept for years to come. And how do you keep it for years to come? That is the question the pro-Palestine movement has to ask itself. How do you keep the momentum? And the other question we have to ask ourselves, how do we keep the momentum without sacrificing much lives? Because
Mm.
here's the deal. The genocide is the reason why we have this moment. We can't deny that. Now, there are some people who look at that and they say, well, therefore, genocide is good, and we have to do more acts of resistance to get Israel to have more acts of aggressions in order to momentumize. And that's flawed logic. How do you keep the Palestinian issue a central issue without sacrificing more Palestinians' life? And believe me, it's possible. It's not impossible. There are other examples you could learn from. You don't need a apocalyptic war all the time because the violence of the Israeli military and terrorism, it still exists. We're not saying it disappeared. It's there. They're killing people every day in Gaza now, despite the ceasefire. But there is no mass killing like it used to be before, this ceasefire. It's still horrible. I don't claim there is a ceasefire.
Mm.
But let's look into how do we continue with that. I
Yeah.
think I think I personally I am for the first time I'd say it on the record optimistic when I talk to pro-Palestine people on the left and on the right, despite that I had historically a lot of disagreements with a lot of them, more and more of them are coming to appreciate my approach and to appreciate what I say and I don't care if they appreciate
Mm.
what I say, but I care more into drawing the lessons that I believe should be drawn.
Yeah.
Meaning that how do we keep the momentum? How do we keep the Palestinians in their land? How do we keep all these issues happen?
Mm. Yeah, I just took a look here from a Gallup poll. The very recent one in 2026 shows that in general Americans 41% or like have more sympathies than Israelis. So it's in general Americans, not just like among Democrat voters. But one can also say, if I would like do just a small pushback, is that Israel was actually losing popularity among Americans before October 7th. So I think, if anything, what Hamas did on October 7th, it helped Israel to win the narrative for a short while among the Americans, win the narrative that, look, the Palestinian side, they are inherently violent, they don't want peace, everything like that. But I mean, because I also remember the situation in Palestine before October 7th. There was still increasing settler terrorism. There was still the violence. 2023 was still one of the most violent years in recent history in Palestine. But what we also saw was that the American government even was more and more inclining towards sanctioning Israeli settlers and actors on the West Bank. So, I mean, just like to put back on I mean, like, I'm not saying you are making the argument, but what many people from Hamas side are saying that, look, October 7, like, it changed everything. I think from my perspective, I think if anything, it pushed the American government to be more hawkish for Israel. this is how I remember, and of course, I think definitely America would always be more sympathetic towards Israel because the support for Israel is pretty much institutionalized, which means that it's very, very deep in the state. So when we see now there is a higher popularity, a plurality for of sympathies for Palestinians than I mean compared to Israelis, American politicians are still lacking behind to the popular
Yeah, demand.
opinion. But I think it will come. It will reach a point when even the Congress and even there will be some American president who will try to at least condition the aid to Israel. We're seeing actually J Street.
Yeah,
It's a pro-Israel lobby group which has recently now basically demanded that America shouldn't give Israel or fund Israel's Iron Dome, and this is something very particular because if you would attack the American supporters, like the Iron Dome, you would say like you just don't want the Jewish people
yeah,
to
yeah.
defend
That
themselves
has
and
been
things
the talking
like
point.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole logic of that, obviously, is that you have to understand that even if you defund the Iron Dome or if you defund the Israeli military, etc., Israel still would be able to continue has its military power because this is a country with GDP yearly of $660 billion. This is a rich country. Many of its citizens are doing way better than even U.S. citizens. So they'll be able to continue that. But what it does for them is that they'll feel the cost of war. Israel today doesn't feel the cost of war, doesn't feel the cost of occupation, doesn't feel the cost of whatever it does. Why? Because we pay for it. The American taxpayers. We pay for whatever Israel mistakes, whatever bad policies they are taking, etc. And yes, I agree. There has been growing frustration with Israel prior to the genocide in Gaza, and we've been seeing that as the public opinion, etc. What the genocide did, it escalated thing. It's almost like an earthquake that shaked all the foundations. Now, on the institutionalized support for Israel. Yes, it's been institutionalized, but what it's important to know that this hasn't been the case even before 1948 or even in the 50s. It has grown. The Zionist influence has grown and grown. And the people of the United States and their politicians who were able before to limit the Zionist influence are no longer at this point, but they're awakening again to how much it grown, and they would love to limit it. Now that's the challenge. How do you get there? How do you realize? Because there's so many laws that has been passed. There's so many. For example, there are laws in certain states in the U.S. that boycotting Israel is not allowed, which is a violation of the very foundation of what does it mean to be American from a freedom of speech point of view. So all these things are being imposed on the American people, and the American people are awaking more. What will happen, and what need to happen is you need a new political class or some within the political class who are showing sympathy to the idea of not even Palestinians, to the idea that the American people have to be free without foreign intervention and foreign influence on them. That would does the job, and I think this is happening. It's about time that the American people will wake up to that reality.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think. I mean, like, I definitely think. I mean, like, I think it's a matter of time before the American state will, or we're going to experience a more a pivot towards a new policy in the United States of America. I think even because Netanyahu is so desperate to launch wars against everyone in the Middle East, even Donald Trump will at some point freak out at Netanyahu because this is also dragging America into many pointless conflicts. Now we're seeing between Israel and Iran. Iran has been launching lots of missiles, and it has been exhausting the anti-missile systems in the region. It has, um, I mean, like it has caused a distrust between the Arab Gulf states and the United States, where the Arab states have now lost much faith in having America as a security contractor. And I mean, I think the more Netanyahu and the and the Israelis are getting now desperate and acting very impulsively instead of trying to find a solution with the Palestinians. Because as much Israelis try to sideline the Palestinian people, we see the Abraham Accords, we see that Israel I mean, like, we can even go back to the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. I think it was in 70s, late 70s. You can correct me if I'm wrong with some, but like it was during that period where Israel thought if they made peace with the strongest Arab state, the Palestinian cause would slowly die. It doesn't.
Yeah,
And when Israel withdrew from Lebanon, still, it's. I mean, like, as much one wants to have this kind of wishful thinking, the Palestinian issue, it always remains in the center of the Middle East, especially for the Israelis. Um, and I think even Americans are realizing this more and
of
more.
course. Yeah, and I think a lot Americans used to realize that, like the American policy, like Reagan recognized that at some point. Other presidents, not that they became supportive, but they acknowledged. Even George Bush W. Bush, like he realized that this is an issue. But you have a since Biden, not Biden, since Trump, the first Trump administration, there has been change with policy toward very like extreme like disregard for Palestinian rights completely. Not that it wasn't under Clinton, it was, but like complete disregard. And Biden continued on that, and now Trump continues on that. No one has reversed these policies. What need to happen is for the Americans to reverse this issue. Now, on the Israeli side of thinking that we could make peace with other states, etc., that has been an idea that the Israeli right has had for so long, because for uh, simply at the beginning, they didn't even acknowledge that the Palestinian people exist. Therefore, we are Arabs, and if they make peace with the rest of Arabs, we would just follow through. The second thing is that they don't want to reckon with the idea that Palestinians deserve rights. Because once you acknowledge that, you have to open the Pandora box of what you did in 48 and what you're doing right now and the borders and all that. And you don't want to deal with it. Now, I'm afraid, Omar, that at this point, like for so long, there were this whole notion of like we can shrink the conflict. Some people were saying, other people were saying we can manage the conflict, etc. Right now, like no, people, Israelis are talking about ending the conflict, but not ending it with peace, ending it with ethnic cleansing, ending it with a complete slaughter of the Palestinians, stripping people from their citizenships, etc. There is a scenario, a real scenario, in which they push for ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, same as they're trying in Gaza. And there is a scenario in which they annex the West Bank completely and not give the Palestinians any rights, and still they can maintain a Jewish state, an apartheid Jewish state, and they exclude Gaza whatsoever. All these are scenarios that are being studied in Israel and that are being talked about in public. It's not a secret, they're talked about in public. The one scenario that is not being talked about at all is giving the Palestinians their rights, whether that is through a one state solution of equal rights or whether that is in a two-state solution. For somehow, some people like tell me all the time because I support two-state solution, oh, you're Zionist, you're this, you're that. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like literally, that is the antithetical to Zionism solution that's today according to the state of Israel. But not only that, obviously, the logic that if you accept an Israeli state, therefore you're Zionist is just it's just hilarious to me, because like I accept German state, I'm not a German nationalist, I accept this and that. So it's different. Now, how do Israel define itself as Jewish or not? That's their own internal business. I don't think a Jewish state is a good idea, but that's their own business. So it is we are at a place where the Israeli people and government, both, unfortunately, according to numbers, have decided that there is no way to approach a compromise and peace with the Palestinians. And I'm afraid that they will not unless they pay the price for their crimes. And the only way they can pay the price for the crimes if the US and the Western world decided to push for harsh sanctions. And it starts with the US because the US is the state with power to do so.
Mm. I mean, I think, I mean, I used to be very optimistic about sanctions before against Israel. I mean, the issue with the United States is that it's currently, at least, very pro-Israel, very hawkish pro-Israel, and European Union, which I
Yeah.
have more faith in when it comes to human rights and international law. It has been firstly a bit hypocritical when you're looking at how member states are treating Palestine compared to, let's say, Ukraine. Of course, one shouldn't say these are contradictory. One should support both. Um, but you're seeing how their position on the same things, but it's just like it happens to be on different regions. It's totally different. But then, like, there are also some veto players, what one would call them. There, for instance, there is now, for instance, Hungary, where good news here is that Orban lost, so probably we will lose one veto player in the European Union, which has been opposing any European sanctions of Israel. Um, but I mean, as we're seeing right now, Israel can act very much with impunity. This is, and I think from any rational point of view, giving a state total impunity to act however it wants, I think it's not even in American interest. When Israel is dragging America into pointless wars, costly wars that would cost American taxpayers billions of dollars. I think already this war with Iran has cost the American taxpayers around $30 billion. It's not sure that Americans will benefit from the win the war. And then we're seeing Israel is trying to cause problems with Syria. Now we're seeing Lebanon drag itself into almost a permanent or even a permanent situation there. Um, and still it has no solution. When you ask an Israeli politician about what kind of solution they have for the conflict with the Palestinians, they don't give you any reasonable answer. They just want the Palestinians to be subjugated to Israel or accept any Bantustan borders they will provide, which will not even be sovereign. They will not be able to really rule themselves, because I think Israelis have this kind of image of Palestinians that we are not equal. We're not human beings as them. We're just a problem that they want to manage on a bare minimum. This was basically the policy which Naftali Bennett had when he was the prime minister, when he managed Hamas. He fought just like trying to create some form of interdependence, but this doesn't work if one is not trying to actually pursue a long-term solution. So I think, I mean, like, my perspective is that we're in a stalemate, in a political stalemate. And one very interesting thing is that many people are now like turning too much of their anger towards Jordan and Egypt. And I can understand much of the frustration, but then we have like Jordan, for instance. It doesn't really have an army to counter Israel, so they want another 6-day war against Israel. We know that Jordan, I mean, barely it can control its own borders. They want it to directly confront Israel. And then you have Egypt, the Egyptian military. I mean, I think definitely it could counter Israel, but we as Palestinians, I think it's difficult from our part to ask another country to go at war, risk their own stability, their
Yeah,
economy.
yeah, and the whole idea, Omar, of any Arab nation at this point in history to enter war in behalf of Palestine, it's beyond reasonable. Not only for economical calculation and others, but also for a basic reality in which there is one nuclear weapon one nuclear state with the nuclear weapon, that is the state of Israel, with a doctrine known of massive plans to destroy Arab cities in the case of attack. So it's Israel has a military doctrine in which they would plan and execute a complete nukes to destroy Arab nations. That would be dumb and suicidal on the Palestinian side. Not to mention that up until now, they have the American allies. If a state would attack, the Americans would come to defend them as well. Even if the Americans are out of the equation, you still have the nuclear. So the only solution with Israel is to pressure it to the extent that it would accept a compromise. In the same way Sadat did when he attacked. He attacked in a way that wouldn't defeat Israel completely, but defeat it enough to make a compromise. That's what we need. Military is off the table at this point. If the things continue change in the future. Maybe Egypt becomes economical power and they have nuclear, etc. Maybe things change, or maybe Turkey rise and they want to confront Israel. That's a different question. Geopolitically, it's not my business. I still wouldn't prefer it, but that's up to the states to decide in the future. Right now, reading the reality as it is, military power out of the question. People who are talking about resistance and guerrilla fighters such as Hezbollah and Hamas, I'm afraid they live in delusion. We're losing more than we're winning with it. There is nothing that look at Gaza. It's a devastated piece of land that has nothing. Lebanon is becoming the same. Look at what the Iranians are doing. They went right away to negotiation. They didn't mention Palestine. Not once did they mention Palestine or the Palestinian rights. They're looking after their own national interest. And I get it. I'm not like, oh, you should bring Palestine, etc. But like, if you're 24 hours claiming to fight for us, represent us, etc., at least you would get us something. So the Palestinians have no one but ourselves. So when we have no one but ourselves, we have to ask the question, what are the means that we possess? And if someone tells you weapon, you gotta laugh at them because we've got no weapons. Even Hamas, what weapons? It's a joke. There is no weapons. It's just like just like basic stuff that haven't been able to even deter Israel. Israel entered every place in Gaza. The only reason why they didn't finish, quote unquote, the job what they want, which is a full ethnic cleansing, because the Egyptian closed the border. The people would have left. The people are sick, and
Mm.
also because they don't want to annex Gaza, obviously, and take the population because the demographical problem with Israel. So what
Mm.
we have at our possess, we have the moral argument that is very powerful, that has gained the word support for it. That is not enough, obviously. And then what we have is the ability to mobilize the world and change the world. That's what we have to play on. That's on the political side of the globally. The second thing, we have to clink back to our Arab brothers and sisters and the nations and get them again to coordinate with the Palestinians. What Israel succeeded is in with the last Trump administration with the Abraham Accord wasn't only that they gained the normalization with UAE, because it's not a major thing. They've had more or less relationships behind the scenes forever, etc. But they managed to break the idea that Palestinians have monopoly over the question of normalization. Because Jordan, remember, when they normalized with Israel, they had to more or less has the approval from the Palestinians. And they had to wait for Palestinians to start the Oslo Agreement, etc. And in light of that, the only nation that is different was Egypt. And even Egypt talked to the Palestinians and said, come to the table, let's talk about it. Palestinians rejected. It's a different case. But up until the Abraham Accord, there was full taboo on the idea of normalizing with Israel before Palestinian state. This has to be back. We have to work hard with the Arabs to tell them, and we don't have to make the argument. Listen, it's in our interest. Please, we're so weak. No, 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 no. That's not what we're saying. Yes, we are weak. Yes, we are in a desperate situation, but it's not in the interest of the region for the
Mm.
world to normalize with Israel peace without a Palestinian state. Why? Two things. Obviously, Palestinian rights, all of that. But the second, without a Palestinian state or Palestinian rights, the state of Israel remains without borders. The state of Israel remains exceptionist and expansionist. And that is a danger to the Arab world. In a way, the best thing that could happen to the Arab world with a Palestinian state, that it's limit Israel finally to have its own borders. And it forced it to have its own borders, and that should be a goal of every Arab in the region. It fascinates me that I find some folks in Lebanon think that Israel somehow could be their friend without the Palestinians. Well, dude, like they're not gonna they're gonna expand. There is no way around it. They will expand to Lebanon. They already expanded to Syria. They would expand to Jordan. They would expand to anywhere, as long as they don't have limit. But what would happen? Israel without the occupation would mean that the messianic stream within Israel would lose, and you'll have the more rational Zionists, I'm not saying non-Zionist, and then perhaps with time, there is a world in which Zionism itself dissolves itself because it feels that it accomplished what it accomplished. It accomplished the state of Israel, and therefore there is no need to establish Zionism. Or not, but something happens. Regardless, it's a much better outcome of where we are right now. And that case has to be remade. I am not in the business. A lot of the pro-Palestine folks are in the business of attacking Arab state 24 hours and demonizing them, etc. I'm not in that business. Do I critique them? Am I mad at them, etc.? Of course, I am. I'm very frustrated with the Emiratis. I'm very frustrated with the Bahrainis, with the Moroccan. I respect some of what the Saudis are doing for our cause. I would love them to do more. But what I have to keep in mind is that I have to tailor and to offer a perspective from their interest for why the Palestine issue matter for them.
Certainly so. And if we just get back to your project in Agora Initiative, from my understanding, you also have locals in Gaza, some which you're also coordinating with, and wouldn't do you also have like other parts? And would you like would you like to offer us like some an insight of your work?
Sure.
You document, you educate. Could you just like provide some insight in what you do?
Absolutely, yeah. So what I've been doing, Omar, for the last couple of years, trying to talk to the Americans their language, trying to explain to them with simple, plain English why the Palestinian issue matter and why it's issue that matters to the Americans, and it's good for them to support peace between Palestinians and Israelis, because I genuinely want peace, but not peace in the fake claim of Oslo or the fake claim with the Zionism. Peace that is based on justice, peace that is based on the first premise of ending the occupation and accepting that the Palestinians are full, equal human beings like them, and a people that have self determination based on two states, one state, I don't care. And I work hard with different audiences. Big part of what Agora does that is different from other organizations, Omar, is that we firmly believe that the Palestine issue is a non-partisan issue, non-ideological issue, meaning that you could be on the far left and support Palestine, you could be on the far right and support Palestine, and we would welcome both of your supports. That makes us different because I end up talking to people like, from the far right, like Steve Bannon, to the far left, like, anyone you could think
Mm.
of. Um, Meetings behind the scenes, dinners, conferences, papers, streaming of movies. We speak around. I go to campuses. I go to other places. We do all of this, in addition to everything we do in the U.S. because that is the core of our mission. That's where we're based. We do have local team in Egypt and in Jordan and Palestine as well. What we do, we're helping right now with paying for the education of people who lost their parents in Gaza due to the Israeli genocide. And we help them go to schools in Egypt and others. It's a very small program, not large because of the lack of funding. We try to fundraise more and therefore enroll more students. That's what we're doing, and the hope is that we are helping move more and more people. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to talk about details of what we do. There's a lot of things that we do that we can't share in public because it's private, because of people's uh, um, private, life, etc., and different politicians, public personals, etc. But we're doing a lot behind the scenes, all within the legal frame in the U.S., all within, acknowledging that we are a nonprofit with limits into what we can do in terms of work in that space.
I mean, it's definitely an important work you're doing, and I think there is an issue also when many people are trying to frame Palestine. You know, it's an Islamic cause, it's a Christian cause. You know, it's a leftist cause, it's right. You know, like when people try to make such divisions, try to portray Palestine like as you have to belong, you must have some set of opinions to support Palestine. I mean, like, I believe Palestine is a humanitarian cause above all. But I think when people are trying to gatekeep the Palestinian issue, if this is a better phrasing, I think these people are doing more harm than
Yeah,
good
yeah. No, I
to
agree.
Palestinian
I
people.
agree. I agree, and I've been criticized a lot by people who are allies on the Jewish anti-Zionist left because I talked, for example, to people like Matt Gaetz, who's on the right, and because I talked to Steve Bannon and others. And obviously, I don't endorse everything Steve Bannon think or Matt Gaetz, or nor I endorse everything like my Jewish anti-Zionist friends think. I don't care. What I care about is that one piece. It's the Palestine issue, and how do I push for that? And that's, I think, the criticism from all these people is that they want you to be pure and they want you to be after their own image. I remember there was this anti-Zionist Twitter account, Jewish guy by name, I think, Dan Cohen, and he
Yeah.
went after me, accused me of being Zionist, being AIPAC funded, whatever. It's all obviously lies. But then one
Yeah.
thing that really stuck with me is that he said, if you believe that the Jewish people are people, therefore you're a Zionist. And by acknowledging two states reality, you're a Zionist. There is no way around it. I told him, hey, Yasser Arafat acknowledged two state solution. Yasser Arafat is not a Zionist. So is Ahmed Yassin and so Hamas leaders, by the way. They're not Zionists. And then P, the idea that we, the Palestinian people, have to go far even beyond rejecting the state of Israel and Zionism to even rejecting Jewish peoplehood is a bazaar. It's not my business. I'm not Jew. You can define yourself as a people, as the Jewish people. I don't care. What I care about, don't come and take my land at my expense. That is
Yeah.
our issue with Zionism. The Palestinian critique of Zionism is different than the Jewish anti-Zionist critique of Zionism. We have nothing to do with Jewish religion. We have nothing to do with their nationality, etc. There are some Palestinians, obviously, that go far and talk about this stuff, but sorry, I'm not Jewish, nor my family members are Jewish. So it's not my business to talk about issues. As
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, my problem with Zionism that it's at my expense. Have it not been at my expense or at the expense of any people around the world, I'd be fine with a Jewish state.
Before we wrap this episode up, what are your predictions for what is going to happen next? We've seen the Board of Peace now. It seems to be about to be buried. What kind of predictions do you have now for what's coming up next as a final question?
I wish I had a lot to say, Omar. Things looking very dark and very much on both. The whole idea of board peace has failed in Gaza, and the committee, technocrat committee of Palestinians that were appointed to come to Gaza haven't been even allowed into Gaza. They haven't done a single thing. Uh, uh, Israel promised to remove Hamas completely. As far as I'm concerned, Hamas controls Gaza right now. The areas that the Israelis are not within militarily, and they control it education-wise, they control the services, they control everything. So we're back to October 6th, 2023, except that Gaza is devastated, except that there is no aid, except that there is no reconstruction, and a full military occupation in about 60% of Gaza that has been more or less fully ethnic cleansed. Where do we move from here? It depends on two things: how much the U.S. are willing to push Israel on that issue, and the second thing, how much Hamas is willing to engage in a conversation over disarmament. Hamas have made it very clear that they wouldn't disarm, and disarming is more or less is a word for how much Hamas controls Gaza. Everyone who thinks that disarmament is about danger to Israel is delusional. Hamas hasn't fired a single bullet against Israel since the ceasefire, despite that Israel violates the ceasefire daily. And why is that? Because Hamas doesn't possess the power to do it. And Hamas knows that for the next 10 years, they wouldn't have the power to do it anymore. But what they want is to control the people in Gaza, which unfortunately will be very costly and devastating for the people in Gaza. So, unfortunately, we're very stuck in that. There are more and more news and noise that the Israelis might launch another attack on Gaza to force Hamas to give up its weapons. And this time, if this happens, it would be more brutal because remember, they've done this genocide on all these massacres while they're hostages in Gaza and killed some of their hostages. This time, imagine the same thing, but without even Israeli hostages being in Gaza. So I don't think the future looks great. Lebanon is devastated. Gaza could be devastated as well. Israeli settler terrorism is increasing in the West Bank. Things are looking really dark when it comes to the internal issue in Palestine.
Mm. Uh, Khalil, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives and your insights of the situation in Palestine, of your work in America. Uh, uh, so, besides Agora Initiative, where can we others find you and your work? Of course, I will also link this on this
Sure,
on the
yeah.
back.
So go to the agorainitiative.org. It's the agorainitiative.org. You'll find our website. You find all our information there. If you want to make a donation, you can make donation as well. It's all tax deductible as a U.S. Based nonprofit. I'm also at Twitter, and that is at Khalil Jarius Twitter account. You can post my link and my handle. You can find me on Twitter, and you'll yeah, Google me and you'll find a lot of more things.
Thank you so much for taking your time to join us on the podcast.
Thanks, Omar. It's my privilege.